Hello and welcome to Higher Ground and Circle Passages. Hopefully you enjoy what we're going to be talking about today. Jordan and I are going to hopefully present something that might be of interest to you. And welcome, Jordan.
Yeah, no, great to be here.
So we've kind of talked about something to discuss today, and I appreciate your openness to do that, is depression. And it was probably, it's been a couple of years now that when I get to know you, and it sounded like you experienced some depression. It was probably prior to that, I believe. But what do you feel comfortable with in describing what had taken place, kind of leading up to when you realized what was happening, or you knew something wasn't quite right for yourself?
Yeah. So it's in certain ways a bit of a long story, but yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that maybe was like for a lot of people, all sorts of things add up to it, and stress. And my mom was depressed when she was younger, when she was in high school, and so I don't know to what extent genetics would have played a role or anything like that, but definitely when I was younger, I had little things like, I think I wouldn't have called it depression, but we all struggle with things like that and have insecurities and things, and so I do think maybe like most young people, our world is just kind of confusing, and not that it was so bad for me, it certainly wasn't, but I think maybe I didn't have a lot of skills that I feel like I've at least strengthened now to help me be more just comfortable with just who I was and who I am, and having a certain functional level of self-love that is key, I think. And so it wasn't something that was super prevalent, although I had times where I had issues with like being comfortable with myself or things like that, but for the most part, at a young age or even through high school, it wasn't something that I struggled with a ton. I definitely had I had issues like everybody does, like in middle school and in high school, and I wasn't always the most well-behaved person, but I think things were more bubbling under the surface. I think things like we all have insecurities and things like that, and I think I had issues that maybe I had functional outlets to relieve stress or things like that, but I do think I maybe like I said earlier, didn't have great skills for dealing with problems when they arose. I just didn't have as significant problem, or nothing that really came to a big head. And so throughout most of high school, I wouldn't say it was a huge problem for me. And then getting into college, I was really driven. Obviously some of these things, but just to elaborate for people listening, I was pursuing soccer. And so my first couple years in college were good and were functional, and I played soccer, but I do think I don't even think I knew it at the time, but I started to develop little habits that ultimately I don't know that they served me in certain ways, but they maybe didn't serve me in some others. So I could give some context to what that means. So one of the things that I reflect on some now is I was really pursuing soccer and professional soccer and playing Division I, or trying to play Division I and all these things. And it's funny, I was really goal-oriented and driven, and all that is great. But I remember a conversation I had with my younger brother at one point where I was doing all these things, and I remember him asking me if I was happy or if I was having fun. And I gave him some sort of answer like, being happy isn't what's important right now. The development, like the grind is what's important right now. And I don't think that that's 100% wrong necessarily, but it's funny, I reflect on that now, and I start thinking, if I had known some of the things I know now or had some of the skills that maybe I've tried to develop over the last couple of years, maybe there would have been more red flags. I suppose I use that to say that I might have noticed more red flags for the way I talked and related to myself. Which again, I think is not, I don't want to speak for everybody because I only live my own experience, but I spend a lot of time, as you know, with young people, and I would venture to say that that is not uncommon. I think young people in general, maybe it doesn't always it might never come to a head the way it did for me in my later college years or become an issue, but I do think a lot of people could benefit. Part of the reason we do the work we do is these skills could benefit everybody, not just people who are, massively depressed. It could help you not even descend into anything like that, just a certain level of awareness. But to get back to the story a bit, I moved up to Seattle and I was playing really competitive soccer up there, and for the most part was having fun in certain ways. My first couple years of college, I didn't really party or whatever. I didn't drink that much or anything like that. And so when I moved up to Seattle, I was 21, and so was doing kind of the whole social thing in addition to playing really competitive college soccer, which all that seems like it would be relative. Drinking, alcohol in excess isn't healthy necessarily, but that seems like what a typical young person. I was 21. I was playing, pretty competitive collegiate sports and was pretty social, and all that seems relatively normal. So I'm not, other people who are doing those sorts of things, I don't have judgment for, but I think for myself, I started to develop, I don't know, not even unhappiness. I think there were a lot of times where I was having fun, but I think in a deeper sort of way, I wasn't fulfilled in a lot of the things I was doing. And I don't know, that in certain ways kind of, it didn't immediately start to spiral. That maybe isn't the best way of framing it, but I think I started more and more becoming unsatisfied with the decisions I was making and whether or not I was having a positive impact on the world. And I can acknowledge for myself too, I probably hyperanalyze more than I need to. And so I think there was a lot of that going on too. But that all, is part of how you relate to yourself. And, we all live in our own minds, and we're all talking to ourselves all the time, constantly, and, creating this little world that we live in. And I think I more and more started to become dysfunctional in the way that I would dialogue with myself. And that turned into, which, now I know, at the time I maybe felt like that was a way to push myself towards better things. I was not satisfied with what I'm doing, and so I'm, pushing to do more, which again, seems like it's not the worst thing in the world. But what kind of started happening to me is I think I developed a deep-rooted, guilt almost towards my, what I perceived as my own inaction towards solving the problems of our world, or even solving the problems within myself. I think not all of it is this external battle. A lot of the growth in life that happens internally. And so I was frustrated, and I in a lot of the different things I started doing, I started, it's like becoming hypercritical of myself, which again, it doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world, but in a way that was really dysfunctional, in a way where, I started almost talking to myself in a way where it was like, I'm not doing as much as I could, so I don't deserve these opportunities that are given to me. And it kind of worked in that sort of way until, it was almost like I started to, instead of coming to terms and accepting my shortcomings or my insecurities that we all have, and we're all different, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and it was almost like I was aware of the things that I could do to improve my life and the lives of people around me. And any time that I wouldn't do those things, or I wouldn't take those actions, I had just massive amounts of guilt and shame from it, which is just an impossible standard because none of us are perfect. We're all going to have flaws. And one of the things that allows you to continue to grow is almost accepting your flaws. Doesn't mean that you have to continue doing them, but it means that if you make a mistake and then the next rest of your day is just you beating yourself up for the mistake you made, you're more likely to make more mistakes. That's not how you really grow. There's nothing wrong with being, harsh on yourself, and we're all our harshest critic to a certain extent, but there needs to be a level of, it needs to be functional, like the difference between constructive criticism and just criticism. And I think, that would be an easy way to say it for myself. I got to a point where almost all my criticism of self was really, really dysfunctional. And I started to frame things in a way, or I, developed worse and worse, framing things in a way where, we live in the United States. We have, I'm not going to I don't need to figure out how to get food tonight. I have a lot of privilege. And so it was almost like I started to feel more and more like, because I wasn't taking the actions that I could take to make the world around me better, I didn't deserve the privileges and all the things that I had. And so then it's pretty easy to say, well, I'm not doing all the things that I want, that would make the world better. So I don't deserve all the things that I have. And so therefore, as funny as it sounds, it's almost like you work yourself towards the obvious conclusion of, okay, well, I'm a net negative. I'm taking all these resources. I drive around all the time, and I have all these things. There's so many people, millions, literally billions of people on this earth that would, that if they had the access to food and education, all these things I have, God, they would switch places with me like that. And I just felt this deep guilt, like, okay, well, I have all these things, I have access to all these things, and I'm not taking advantage of them. So somebody else would be better off. It'd be better off for me to just remove myself and let somebody else could take all the resources I'm using. Because, same way you could look at like a carbon footprint and go, well, I have a negative carbon footprint on Earth. So if you look at that from an environmental standpoint, and this isn't obviously the way I feel now, but you could just go, well, I have a negative carbon footprint, and I'm frustrated with the way that I'm not following through on the promises I make to people, and I see myself getting worse and worse, and now I see myself, lying to my loved ones and doing all sorts of things where I'm becoming less and less of the person I want to be. Well, maybe it would just be better to remove myself. It might be better off. It might be, and obviously now I can look at it all, and having been through a lot of this experience, I know how wrong I was in perceiving things this way. But it helped me understand, because it happened to me, how people can get to the point where they just go, well, it would be selfless for me to kill myself, right? Because then, my negative carbon footprint would go away, and, I wouldn't be lying to all my loved ones, and they, a lot of my loved ones, my family members, they really love me anyways out of obligation, and a lot of my friends that I spend time with, they're just on my soccer team anyways, and I don't, I remember I was in a lecture at Seattle University, a political science lecture, and we were talking about Nietzsche and Nietzsche's breakdown of different types of friendships, and basically the friendships of utility versus like true friendships. There was another type of friendships in there too, friendships of utility, friendships of pleasure maybe. Like self-serving pleasure kind of, and true friendships. And I remember saying to one of my friends, like, all my friends on the soccer team I play on the soccer team with them, that's why we're friends. All my family members love me because of course they do. And so I got to a point where I was like, well, none of these people are choosing to love me. These people are loving me because they have to, or they care about me because they have to. Well, why not remove that burden from them? Oh my gosh, why they're having to love me, and I'm this person who's continuously getting worse and worse, eating up all these resources as I do it. Well, man, if I just removed myself from the situation, my family would be able to stop putting energy and money into me, and all these other people could go on with their lives. All of that sounds comical reflecting on it now, because, oh my gosh, how deeply flawed it is to think that your family is going to be better off if you committed suicide. That's like the most, that's the most ludicrous thing ever. I mean, Geez, I promise you they won't. If you're feeling that way yourself, I promise you they won't. I promise you it will be a very stressful situation for them. Which again is something that, you know, the guilt of doing that is something that you're going to have to, that I had to move on from too. But sorry, this is obviously just an absolute word dump of a story. But yeah, ultimately, it's almost like by rational conclusion I came to the point where, well, I'm a net negative, and so it'd be good. The selfless thing for me to do is to remove myself from the situation, and that's funny. I mean, again, we all live in our own minds, and especially if you don't. This is part of the reason that I think just talking to people about the things that are bothering you are so important, because we could sit and listen to that now, and that's just like, I mean, you know, my mom. That's the idea that my mom would be better off if I wasn't around is so ludicrous. It's like totally laughable.
Right.
Not just laughable. It's like almost deeply disturbed in a certain sort of way, and it is maybe disturbed in a certain sort of way, but. That's why I think it's so important for people to talk about the things that they're struggling with, because it would have been, you know, some of those ideas, if I would have vocalized them, even my friends up in Seattle at the time would have so quickly been like, yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like, that's not true. That's so far from the truth that it's crazy. Even, you know, it's so funny, I reflect on my time, and I had so much deep hatred, like you've heard me say before, I didn't even know I could hate something as much as I hated myself during that period. Like, nothing has come close. It's hard to imagine what somebody would have to do to me for me to hate them as much as I hated myself during that period. It's unthinkable. It seems unrealistic. But the funny thing is, as I reflect, I still have friends from that period. Like, my friends, even from that period of time, are like, yeah, you were a nice guy. I don't know why you hated yourself so bad. You were pretty nice to most other people. Like, I wasn't even close to as much of a negative impact on people as I thought I was. I mean, in reality, I probably was still a positive impact on people. All my friends, most of my friends thought I was like, you know, very selfless and all sorts of things like that. And the fact that I was probably even thinking about all this was probably, you know, working against myself more than anything, and they knew that. And the times that I did talk to them about that, they absolutely felt that way.
So nobody actually picked up on this, friends or family, during this time?
I don't think anybody. Partially because I didn't talk to people about it. I mean, you know, once things came to, like I keep saying, came to a head. There is a point where these things spiral enough where you can't hide them from other people. You know, that's the ironic thing about all of it, is like, you don't want people to know that you're having these problems, and so you don't talk to people about them, which ultimately allows them to continue to get worse and worse until you get to a point where there's no hiding this anymore. This is something that is going to have to be dealt with. And so, yeah, I don't think anybody really knew how bad it was until they did, I guess. But the little conversations I had with people, though, I mean, God, I mean, I had friends definitely on multiple occasions tell me, my friend Burke, who I really love, who is a really thoughtful guy, on many occasions would tell me, you are overthinking all of this. You are overthinking all of this. You need to just take a deep breath. You need to just, you know, whatever it is, do the next right thing, or, you know, all these sort of skills that I reflect on now, and I go, well, I should have just done that. I should have, and it's easy, you know.
Sure.
Hindsight is so 20/20, especially as we get older in life. It's easy to look back on your younger self and go, well, why didn't I just do that? That's dumb. I should have just done that. Well, yeah, I suppose I should have, but at the time, it's not that straightforward, maybe. But yeah, and I think that's common, like you asked. I think that's really common too, is people don't want other people to know that they're struggling with these things. Which is so negative in so many ways, because then not only are you going to continue struggling with it, but the person that you could have, like, they might be struggling with something too. It's really humanizing to share your struggles, I think, because people can relate to that. You know, people can relate to, everybody's going through something, and it might not be exactly what you're going through, but it helps to know that other people are going through things, because it's almost reminds you that, you know, everybody's life isn't perfect. We like to think, again, we're all in our own heads, so I like to be, oh, well, he's got everything under control and she's got everything under control and I'm just here struggling with this. And in reality, I mean, I don't know that any of us have everything 100% under control. And so talking about things in that way, it helps people take a deep breath and almost go, okay, I'm not the one, you know, it's like the whole social media thing is we all want to look at what everybody else is doing and go, they've got it all figured out. And it's like, I don't know that they do.
Right.
And it's probably dysfunctional for us all to feel that way because it heightens the extent to which we feel like our problems are this massive thing that, gosh, I'm struggling with depression and I'm just the odd one out. And it's like, if we all talked about it a little more, we might all come to realize that none of us are the odd one out. We're all just our unique selves struggling with our own things. But it is funny because, you know, I reflect on it now again, and I worked hard to not let people know how much I was struggling. And again, I was really working against myself more than anything. And it wasn't until I actually started being open with people and really talking with people and, you know, and then when we met doing the things like we talk about on here is doing a rites of passage where, you know, I'm deep diving into why do I feel this way and what are the things that I can do, you know, like we talk about these tools, what are the things that I can do to foster self-love and things like that. And it wasn't until I started, you know, like I feel like this is so common. This is what you hear a lot of people say is it wasn't until I put it out in front of people. It wasn't until I made it public and said, I'm struggling. And not I'm struggling, everybody needs to come help me, but I'm struggling and I'm not ashamed of it and I'm working on it. And I'm going to do something about it. I'm not going to be ashamed of this anymore. You know, it's the like no more struggling in silence. It's like why not have a bit of solidarity with this because other people's lives are not as perfect as you feel like they are in your head. And if you're just open with people about it, you know, then we can be in a situation where we feel like you want to share things because then we can all get better instead of, you know, everybody, like, God, I reflect on so many situations where somebody would say something and I would just go, you know, like, I don't know what just made me think of this, but maybe this will be helpful for other people is I remember hearing a couple different people, one of them being my college coach, who I love. I mean, it's all worn out, but I wear the bracelet for his youth camps that he runs that I work out a lot. But I love my old college coach. He's a good guy. But I remember there was one point where I was in crutches. Well, I suppose really quickly, one of the major things that I left out of that story as I explained it was I had, while I was playing soccer, I had a major knee surgery. And so I think this is common too. Sorry, I'll tangent back to that idea. I just kind of started, but this is actually really important because even though, like I said, a lot of these things were bubbling under the surface probably for many years, and I do think I was conscious of the fact that I had a deep dissatisfaction and I was unfulfilled in a lot of the things I was doing. I think one of the things that can happen for people, and I don't know that it's always this way, but I can only speak to my own experience, was there's something that will happen that's almost like a catalyst that will, you know, the way I look at it for myself was I think I had some of these issues, but I had different tools than I had now, but I had outlets to help me with them. And one of the major ones was soccer, I was pursuing soccer and I was doing this, and even when things around me were going poorly, I could channel energy into athletics. And then I had this major knee surgery. I was in a soccer practice, kind of right at the start of the season. This was in 2018. And yeah, I tore my ACL and my MCL and I lost a bunch of cartilage in my meniscus. You know, just my knee landed awkwardly on one leg after jumping in the air and my knee buckled way in. And but anyways, so I had this major knee surgery, and because I lost a lot of cartilage, I couldn't put pressure on my knee. And so the recovery time in terms of being on crutches was a lot longer. And so that was in October maybe of 2018. And so then I spent the next 3.5, 4 months on crutches, which again, I think I already had a lot of these issues, but I think in certain ways that was maybe the catalyst for me in that it was like all the things that I had that I didn't even know that they were that, but the things that I had that were maybe keeping me from, I don't know, these issues from developing and getting worse, like athletics, even whether you are playing on a team or anything like that, being active is one of the great releases serotonin and all these sorts of things. It's biochemically good for you, not just whatever muscular development or anything like that. But so I think that was one of the things that kept me from really falling out, and then having that, really made it so that I've had 4 months where I couldn't even walk. I was just in bed, and it was really hard for me. And so that's what I was getting to a second ago. Is I remember we were going out and supporting, I think, the track team and watching the track team run, because we would do things like that, support the other teams, the other programs at the school. And our coach had given a couple of us a ride, and so I was riding back with our coach, and he's driving a bunch of us, just across Seattle. And this is me, and I'm massively depressed, and I can't walk, and I probably haven't walked for 2 months. I've been on crutches in the wintertime in Seattle, which is pretty hilly.
Yeah.
I'm like crutching through the ice and snow to class every day. I'm really depressed, and I'm just not having a very good time of it, let's say. And I remember my coach said, and I don't have any judgment towards him or anything like that, but I remember he was talking about, somebody had brought up maybe grades or something like that. And I remember him saying, he would say multiple times, I've heard him say this multiple times, and I don't even call him out for it or anything like that, but he'll say to kids, do you have a wife? Or do you have a house that you pay a mortgage on? Do you have kids? No, well, you have no responsibility. Your life is easy. And then he said at that time, and I've heard him say it before, and again, I have no judgment for him. He said, life is going to get a lot worse and more stressful from here. And I feel like that's something that is said to kids maybe often nowadays, is like, oh my gosh, life is going to get so much harder. And oh my God, can you imagine a worse thing to say, not just to me, but to all the young people out there, or people in general, is, can you imagine a worse thing to tell a depressed, borderline suicidal child than, don't worry, it's only going to get harder from here. Yeah, right. Like, what in the hell are we doing? Why in the world did you say that to a kid who's struggling in every way and wishes that they didn't want to be here now? You're going to tell them that, don't worry about it, things are only going to get worse. And so that's
encouragement. Yeah,
and that's the sort of thing I'm talking about, where it's like, if we were all a little bit more open in the way we communicated about those things, even things like that, my coach didn't mean anything bad. He didn't even know I was depressed at the time. Like I said, he's a good guy. He had a friend of his commit suicide when he was younger, when he was in high school. And I only bring that up because to say that he's not like ignorant, or he's not have issues with people with mental health or anything. If he knew, he would try and be helpful. It's almost like we don't even know the impact we're having, because these conversations are just not happening the way that they really should. And so all of that is really to say, whether you're the person who's struggling, or somebody who you feel like might be struggling, or whatever it is, conversation is one of the first ways. And we're going to talk maybe in the next show about all sorts of skills that you can develop. And I do yoga, and there are all these different practices that I do, but I don't know that I would have realized or known where to go and where to pick up these skills until I just came out and started telling people I'm struggling, and started seeing a counselor, and started being open in the way that I talk to people, because until we do that, we're not going to be able to help people the way that we could, and each other. We can be way more of a support structure for each other than we realize we can be, and part of the reason I think that's not happening is just because we don't talk about it the way we could. And that's something I hope that we're working on changing, and we're working on taking the stigma away, because it sucks that kids feel like they can't talk, or people, not just kids, but people in everybody. It sucks that everybody feels like they can't talk about the issues that they have going on, or that people aren't listening to them, or that their parents or kids or friends or family or whatever will judge them for the issues that they're having. And I just feel like, man, it's 2022. The judgment of others, or the idea that others are going to judge us, or actively judging each other, we just got to move beyond that. And I'm not saying it's going to happen easily, but one of the ways we move beyond it is we all just start admitting openly that we have problems, And everybody goes through, has stuff that they deal with, and that's okay. And, once we all start kind of coming to terms with the fact that we all have insecurities and we all have things that we wish were better about ourselves, and that's like a universal, in my opinion, it seems to be a universal element of the human experience, is that we are all imperfect. Part of being like conscious beings means that, like a lot of animals aren't conscious about the fact that their spots are different than the other, or that they have slightly shorter arms, or that they're more or less hairy than the other creatures around them. Part of being conscious is the fact that we're conscious of the ways that we're different from most other people. Most people do this and I do something else, and that makes me feel awkward. And I don't know, just the things that make us unique are positive, beautiful, good things. And I just think the idea of normal, or whatever it is that's keeping us from being open with those things, the insecurities and the things that hold us back from loving ourselves and being the people we can be, those things just aren't serving us. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, we need to help each other and then be open and not have judgment.
And you've done just a wonderful job of that today, explaining how things build up, how it gets away from you. And actually what I'd like to do is, as we wind down for today, is to revisit it at some time. And like you said, we'll be doing another show that will speak to some of that, but really to come back to this topic right here that you just mentioned. So, I really appreciate your openness and sharing as you have. And what I'd like to do is say thank you for tuning in, and check us out again, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.